We continue today in Genesis 13 with Lot's response to his uncle Abram's invitation or command to separate from him and choose the land that he wants. So we pick up here in verse 10, and I've left on the right side of the screen the chapter with the key words so we can see where we're picking up here, how much the theme is all about the land here. Against those who might have read this as the question of Lot's, whether Lot would be the heir, the descendant who would inherit all the land that Yahweh has promised to Abram and Sarai. But plainly the issue is about the land here and not about inheritance. That won't be the theme until chapter 15 and the chapters that follow. So what we see here is Lot's gaze. And as many commentators noted, the historic biblical midrash sees every word in verse 10 as an expression of immorality. And we can't get in all the details of the midrash, but hopefully we can hear, as we look at this, the style of gaze by which Lot looks at the land, in contrast with what we'll see next video, where Yahweh speaks directly to Abram and gives him a perspective on the land that he will get. So we see Lot looked here, Vaisa here, literally lifted up his eyes, and saw. And we'll see a couple of examples of that where there's always some kind of lascivious, lustful context of that, whether that was in the Garden of Eden with the woman before she was Eve looking at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or as Mrs. Potiphar gazing on Joseph in chapter 39. So he's looking out with this desirous gaze and saw that the plain of the Jordan was well watered everywhere like the garden of Yahweh. So here's an artistic image from the 17th century of Abram and Lot looking out across this land. But here's what it looks like on Google Maps today. If you were standing there in Bethane, which is the village understood as Bethel, and looking eastward out, you'd see the Jordan plain there. What he could see from that place that makes it look well watered, or perhaps it was better watered at the time, and whether the audience in exile would know what that looked like is another question. But apart from the reality of it is the language with which it's described here. So the plain of the Jordan, which is to say the flat land, the land that would be a good agricultural land. So far, we haven't heard anything about agriculture other than the Garden of Eden and the juxtaposition of Cain and Abel as a shepherd and as a farmer. But none of the other characters we've seen have been engaging in farming other than Lot planting the vineyard for the sake of getting drunk after the flood. So Lot is looking out long term here at a place to settle in and become a farmer. And well-watered everywhere is certainly a way to understand good land. Certainly the way the Babylonians understood good land, because they were focused on the Tigris and the Euphrates. The very name Mesopotamia from the Greek means between the rivers. And as we saw in the possible routes from Ur up to Haran, certainly you'd have to follow the river. So whether that's for human survival or the survival of your animals or the survival of your agriculture, obviously in a dry climate, water is better than gold. And so something that's well watered everywhere where there's a river would certainly be attractive. And it would be attractive to everybody, which is the problem we'll see in chapter 14 and again in chapter 19. But we're not there yet. Like the Garden of Yahweh, and isn't that an interesting phrase? It doesn't say the Garden of Eden, which obviously Lot wouldn't know anything about. How would he or Abram know anything about the Garden of Eden? But what is this referring to? What Garden of Yahweh would he know about? The only reference to such a thing is in Isaiah 51:3. We can just look at that directly from here for a moment. For Yahweh will comfort Zion, he will comfort all her waste places, and will make her wilderness like Eden, her desert like the garden of Yahweh. Joy and gladness will be found in her. So there's specifically Eden, which is rarely mentioned outside of the Genesis story. But there it's Eden juxtaposes the garden of Yahweh. But again, Lot doesn't know anything about that. So this is just an idea in his mind of some beautiful place that looks like Yahweh has blessed it. But he doesn't consult with Yahweh, and Yahweh does not give him any guidance. So somehow he's got Yahweh in mind, but not in relationship. And then he sees it compared to a couple of things, like the land of Egypt, of course the land they just came from, where he clearly saw agriculture. Maybe he didn't see the slavery that it was based on. In the direction of Zoar, an otherwise not important town, but as my note from Sarna is below, thus linking the scene we're in here with chapter 14 as part of the quote-unquote Lot subplot. And we'll explore that question when we look at how scholars have often seen chapter 14 as a foreign insertion in the midst of these family stories. And I'm going to follow Sarna and others who see it as completely integrated, as we'll see. So in the direction of Zoar, notice that the author or the editor has named Zoar first rather than the more ominous Sodom and Gomorrah, but it doesn't take long before we get there. In the direction of Zoar, before Yahweh Yahweh has destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is one of very rare references in Genesis to future events. Another we'll see later is an implicit reference to the Exodus story, where Yahweh will tell Abraham, that his descendants will be prisoners in a land for 400 years. But this is obviously a story that's going to take place in Genesis 19. So the narrator is giving this little flash forward to make an association. The moment we're looking at Lot's, what a beautiful choice, the Garden of Yahweh, we have to stop and go, uh-oh, before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, which is near Zoar. Let's continue and look at the rest of the choice here. So Lot chose for himself, and the word for choice is only one other time when the sons of God chose women for themselves, and the contrast will be, as we'll see in the next scene, with Yahweh choosing versus Lot choosing. And it highlights a theme throughout Genesis that when people choose without consulting with Yahweh, they're like flesh without spirit. They're operating independently of the very spirit of Yahweh, whose image they've been made, that would guide them to a life of abundance and joy. But Lot is choosing what an ordinary human would choose, and as many other ordinary humans will choose, and that will lead him in the next chapter to become a prisoner of war, as we'll see. So then, to underscore the negative connotations that the editor is putting in here, Lot journeyed eastward. We saw eastward after the Garden of Eden, and we saw eastward as the people from the plain of Shinar were traveling eastward to build the Tower of Babel, and thus they're separate from each other. Let's go down a couple more verses to finish our passage here, and we'll pick up in chapter 14 next time. So in contrast, Abram settled in the land of Canaan. And this is the first time we're hearing him settle. We heard just a few verses earlier the question of other people settled in the land. That was the Canaanites and Perizzites. It said living in the land, but it's the same word here. And so this is the first time he's finally deciding this is where I'm going to be. Having scoped it out, having gone down to Egypt during the hunger, and having returned, now he's settling in the land of Canaan, although we don't hear exactly where, and what the land of Canaan would mean in terms of scope in Abram's mind isn't clear either. There are no boundaries or boundary markers. And the word Canaan is a generic word, much like you might say for Western travelers in the United States across North America going into Indian country, where there'd be a number of different peoples who have different views of each other and of these strangers wandering through. And we'll see more of that as we go. So he settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the plain, adding one more negative connotation. First time we're hearing of cities since the Tower of Babel people wanted to build a city and a tower. But this is a pretty negative place. As we see in my note below, only of Enoch, of Nineveh, and of Babel, and it's already associated with Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot is plainly plainly being signaled that Lot has made a very bad choice. And in case that wasn't enough, he moved his tent as far as Sodom. And now, if that wasn't enough, the narrator finally says, now the people of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against Yahweh. Notice here, it's the blanket condemnation that Abram will test later in his famous, what if there's only 50 good people, what if there's only 10 good people? Now, let's look just closely at the end here. They were wicked, Ra'im, which is the generic note for wicked, as we, in terms of the knowledge of good and evil, back in chapter 2. So we don't know exactly what. Described here as sinners, and great sinners is the only time here in Genesis. We see it's once in the book of Numbers for the Korah's rebellion, and again for another place. But it's plainly describing people who are incredibly evil in some way or another. And I can't repeat this too many times in every video that mentions Sodom. It has nothing whatsoever to do with homosexuality. Our whole scene has everything to do with land and the kind of land you want to live in. And so the wickedness of Sodom, as the text will make plainly clear, and as memories of Sodom and other parts of the Hebrew Bible make clear, the issue is how they treat strangers. The city people versus the people who are wandering out on the earth. And this is obviously a juxtaposition for people in exile. Are we going to return to the land after exile to associate with just the kind of people we have around us in Babylon? Or should we stay away from those people and live on the earth in open hospitality to whoever we encounter? So Lot represents someone who's having trouble accepting a new way of life, and this will not be the first time, because when he's when Sodom's about to be destroyed, he pleads to be placed in a little city, because city life is all he can really understand. So we'll see the fate of Lot in a couple of videos, but next time we'll see the alternative, now that Lot and Abram are separated, how Yahweh speaks directly to Abram about the land that Yahweh is giving him. See you then. Bye-bye.